everyone, welcome back. So in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about what I did with my orchids when I was away for 8 days. So I literally just finished watering all of my orchids. I came back to some nice new blooms. I feel like when you're away from your orchids for a while, you notice a lot of different things since you haven't seen them for a while, which is sort of nice because when you have them, you tend to look at them every day and you don't really notice the big changes. But I came back and I noticed a lot of buds, I noticed a lot of spikes, and I also noticed that some of them were super thirsty. So what I was hoping to do in this video is show you what I did with my orchids when I went on vacation. And I'll put a clip for you right here to show you what I was trying to do. All right, so what I've done is I've put the container of water with the cotton wick. I would normally not use that wick for my self-watering pots because they disintegrate, but they are super fast absorbing, which is why I'm using them. So they will absorb that water in this container into the sphagnum moss, and it should keep my orchids hydrated. These need water every single day, basically, so hopefully when I'll get back, that'll be empty. I did the same with my Phalaenopsis down here, so hopefully these will stay nice and hydrated. I also did it for my Paphiopedilum. Have another set of Oncidiums over here that should stay nice and hydrated. Same thing with these Paphs. If I have an orchid that is very thirsty and I want to try this with it, what I do is I add a tiny bit of sphagnum moss so it can absorb some moisture. Otherwise, this wouldn't work for a bark setup. I did the same thing right over here. So we've got this wick going into the bulbophyllum. If it's an especially thirsty orchid, what I do is I lay it over so there's more surface area. I'm not doing it for the Cattleya, but I'm doing it for the Angraecum, and I added a little bit of sphagnum moss to it as well. I'm also doing it for my Diachea hendersoniana. Same with my houseplants. I'm leaving the rest of my Cattleyas and Dendrobiums alone since they're fine when they completely dry out. And I am going to empty that Vanda water in the morning, and it should be completely hydrated and fine with a week without water. So I will see you guys back here in 8 days to see how this all does and how my orchids fared. Hopefully they stay nice and hydrated. Hopefully they don't get overwatered. And in 1 week's time, hopefully everything survives very nicely. And the last piece that I'd like to leave on is hopefully I come back to a lot of new blooms. So I've got this Jihao Pink Girl opening up, as well as this other Phalaenopsis orchid over here. So hopefully I'll come back to some surprises. So we'll see. So in short, what I was trying to figure out was I got a cotton wick and I have had some cups of water, and I was trying to rig a self-watering system. What ended up happening was the night before I went away, I set up the self-watering system overnight, and when I woke up before I left, I noticed that it absorbed too much water and all of the pots and shelves were over flooding. So that was a fail. So in short, what I ended up doing is absolutely nothing. So I had to remove the wick. There was one exception to the rule, and I have a bulbophyllum. And what I ended up doing was hanging the wick right over the cup so that the bulbophyllum can get drips of water. So it was just hanging over and it dripped onto the pot. So that worked out pretty nicely actually, because when I got back yesterday, I noticed that half of the water went into the bulbophyllum, and since they are super thirsty, I wanted to make sure it was okay while I was gone. I thought I'd stress it out a lot when I was away. Otherwise, what I did here was I watered everything. I spent my time just the night before I left just watering everything. I overwatered as well. I gave so much water to these orchids, but it doesn't matter because it was 8 days without water and everything was bone dry, especially these clay pots. So what I wanted to do today was talk about orchid care when you're away for an extended period of time. So I've moved a lot of my orchids into this semi-hydroponic setup, which works really, really nicely. This has a water reservoir, it has a wick, and it absorbs all of the water relatively slowly, so you don't have to water as often as, say, a clay pot. So I did not worry about these orchids at all. These orchids were good to go. The water reservoir was almost empty, but some of them were empty, but it's still, the Leca absorbs and holds a lot of water. So these orchids were totally fine. My cattleyas as well, I did not worry about them at all. Cattleyas can go dry. I have some in organic and inorganic mixes. So I've got some brassavolas here as well. I did not really care so much about these because these orchids can go bone dry and they're totally fine. And what I did was I just watered them as normal and I didn't worry. Again, anything in a semi-hydroponic setup, I just let it be. So I knew that those were gonna be okay. And any of my cattleyas or dendrobiums, those are totally fine drying out. Where I struggled, where I was very worried and I wanted to set up this drip system, was for these smaller orchids in these pots. So seedling orchids tend to get dehydrated very quickly. Bulbophyllums can get dehydrated very quickly. So I was hoping that I could do this self-watering irrigation system. I sort of hacked it in a way that worked nicely for the bulbo, but it did not give water to these orchids. And they got a little dehydrated, so the canes got a little bit shriveled. So anytime that you are taking care of any orchids, it's the seedlings that you really have to look out for. The smaller the orchid, the more that can go wrong. I found that when I left a little bit of water at the bottom so that it could absorb it, and I also topped off with a little bit of sphagnum, so that there was some wicking action happening, not just flowing right through the bark, but something that would absorb into the pot. I find that the Neophoenicias are very hardy, so when I came back, those were totally fine. And I came back last night, so I immediately ran to my orchids. All of them, with the exception of a few, were perfect. It was as if nothing ever happened. Some of them, you could sort of tell they were a little temperamental. They were a little upset about the whole thing. Let me show you my catasetum. So my catasetum is in complete active growth right now. So this is my Monurara Millennium Magic Witchcraft. I gave it a thorough soaking right before I left. It's in 100% sphagnum moss. And let me show you what is going on with the pot. So, as you can see, there's a lot of roots happening here, and I watered it very thoroughly before I went on vacation, but look at that back bulb, it got shriveled. So this is bone dry. This dries in about 2 days, given the roots absorbing all of the water, and it started desiccating the back bulb. That said, I think this orchid's gonna be just fine. I just soaked it. It's grown a couple more inches from when I left it. But yeah, like ideally I wish I could have watered this, but ultimately this is okay. Just for reference, this is the Monurara Millennium Magic Witchcraft. It's touching the top of the shelf. Before that it was a couple inches shorter. My houseplants were really thirsty. I think the one on the left was the one that took the most damage. The leaves are all yellow, but I'm a little bummed with that, but that's okay. So, I mean, ultimately, I didn't do anything. I tried to do something, but it didn't work. So what I ended up doing was I ended up watering everything. So I erred on the side of overwatering the orchids before I went on my trip. I think the biggest thing that that's gonna happen here is my Tolumnia. So this is a very thirsty orchid. It just went way too dry. I don't think it's gonna make it. It already has a part that died off. I don't think this guy's gonna make it. I've been having trouble with this for the longest. My semi-hydroponic orchids are doing fantastic. I think that's the best part of the grow method. I do have self-watering pots where I did also leave a little bit of water in the reservoir. It's not very warm. I don't like to leave water in there when the weather isn't hot. So unless it's summertime, I try not to do it because it's still been in the 40s over here, and the grow space gets to the 60s at some point when we're not around and we don't have any heat turned on. Otherwise, it was really nice to come back and see all of these beautiful blooms. Everything was, it's just so nice when you don't see your orchids for some time and then you come back and suddenly you have all these spikes, you have all these growths. I came back to a lot of surprises. My Heaven Sent Sweet Baby was in full bloom. My Phalaenopsis is branching. This has been in bloom for over 2 months and it's branching. I've got my little mini phals have opened up. I have another Phalaenopsis that's in bud. I could not be more happy with the progress. Even one of my dendrobiums in the back there, my Dendrobium in OB purple, that one is in spike. My Neophanetia also has a third spike, which is just completely crazy to me. It's the third spike in 6 months. So a part of me feels like my Paphiopedilums and my Phalaenopsis, the ones in smaller pots, these guys probably are stressed because it's been 8 days, but I thoroughly watered them today. I'm gonna baby them for the next couple of weeks. I'm sure they're stressed. But I think for the most part, everything in semi-hydro, all of those Cattleya orchids, all of those Dendrobium orchids that are not seedlings, I think everything fared well. Maybe it's a good thing that they didn't get water for some time. I think a lot of growers tend to overwater their orchids, and giving them a dry spell is actually beneficial sometimes. Look at these buds over here. This is my Akatsuka orchid that was lost in transit. It's had a lot of cold damage, but it's pulling through and it has a bunch of new growths. And it's got some spikes that are gonna be coming in. So anyhow, I wish this video would have been more helpful. I was hoping I'd show a whole method of me rigging a self-watering setup for these orchids. What I ended up doing was I ended up finding the most absorbent piece of cotton that I could ever find, and it just absorbed so much it flooded everything. I think what I'll do next time is I will find something that's less absorbent but can transfer moisture into these pots. So that's what I'm gonna do the next time I go away, especially if it's during the summer, which is when these orchids would be severely stressed without water. Overall, everything turned out just fine, and I'm happy to see the progress on everything. I'll baby the paths and my smaller seedling orchids for a little while. I know they're stressed. My houseplants up top are definitely very stressed, but overall, I think it's gonna be just fine. I'm gonna find a grow method that works for everything. I will not move every single thing into semi-hydro. So for instance, I'm terrified to move the Paphiopedilums into semi-hydro just because I don't have experience with it. And I don't know. I feel like I have to do some trial and error, and I've already killed one path last year and I don't want to do that again. So I'll find a method that works and I'll share it with you guys. Anyway, I was hoping this video would be more helpful, but I wanted to share my experience with leaving my collection without being watered for 8 days when I was away, out of town. And I hope some of this was helpful. I know a lot of folks worry about their orchids when they're not able to be around them for an extended amount of time, but generally, these guys are super hardy. They'll make it just fine. Well, I hope everyone has a good one. I'll catch you guys soon. Bye.